Most women believe that silence in a relationship is weakness. They think words are the currency of intimacy, that filling the empty air with explanations, clarifications, and reassurances will secure their place in a man's heart. Yet the very thing many women fear silence is what keeps a man tethered to their memory long after he walks away. Silence unsettles him. Silence seduces him. Silence is the echo he cannot unhear. Have you ever wondered why a man who leaves often comes back not because of your pleas, not because of your arguments, but because of the quiet space you leave behind? That absence, that whisper of presence withheld, becomes louder than any desperate cry could ever be. It gnaws at him, like a song unfinished, like a door left ajar in a storm. He feels the pull, not from your words, but from the wordlessness. The way your stillness reflects his inner chaos back to him. For a man, silence is not emptiness, is the mirror of his hunger. Carl Gustav Jung once observed that what we resist persists, and nothing is more persistent in a man's psyche than the feminine energy he cannot grasp. Your silence embodies the archetype of the hidden anima, the elusive part of himself he longs to understand but cannot fully own. He will project onto you his shadows, his doubts, his longing for control. And yet, in your refusal to explain, you remain untouchable. Like a veil over sacred fire, your quietness both conceals and reveals, protecting the mystery while hinting at its heat. And so, he circles back, not because of what you give, but because of what you withhold. Silence, in this sense, is not passivity, is power. It is not the silence of repression, but the silence of mastery, the stillness of a queen who does not bow to chaos. Think of the ancient Stoics, who taught that the wise woman does not waste her breath on what cannot be controlled. Her calm presence becomes a fortress, her composure a weapon sharper than any word. To him, this restraint is unbearable because it denies him the drama he unconsciously craves. He expects fire, you hand him air. He expects to consume, you leave him empty-handed. In that emptiness, he feels his own dependency exposed. Men are addicted to the feminine whisper because it destabilizes their illusion of dominance. When you withdraw the noise, you withdraw the mirror he clings to. Without your constant reassurance, he is left to face his own abyss. And though it terrifies him, it also captivates him. Just as a moth hurls itself again and again into the flame it cannot comprehend, he finds himself drawn back to the quiet power that both frightens and fascinates. But silence alone is not enough, it must be infused with dignity. When a woman falls silent in bitterness, her silence hardens into ice, and he feels only resentment. But when she cultivates silence rooted in self-worth, it becomes something different. It becomes a living mystery, a field where he cannot predict, cannot command, cannot consume. That is what makes it addictive. Not the absence of words, but the presence of sovereignty. He begins to realize that her silence is not directed at him. It is her communion with herself. And this realization cuts him deeper than any shouted reproach. There is a particular torment in knowing that someone no longer seeks to convince you, no longer fights to prove her value. A woman who argues is still bound. A woman who pleads is still offering her power. But a woman who withdraws into silence and remains radiant in it, she is untouchable. He senses this, and it haunts him. For silence cannot be debated, cannot be negotiated. It must be endured. And endurance is the hardest trial for the male ego. In these moments, silence becomes a form of shadow work. For the man, It drags forth the parts of himself he would rather avoid, his insecurity, his fear of abandonment, his craving for validation. For the woman, it becomes the forge of individuation. She learns that her worth is not bound to how well she can explain herself, but in how deeply she can remain whole without explanation. Silence is not just the absence of sound, it is the presence of self. Some will call it coldness, others will mistake it for detachment. But silence, when rooted in feminine strength, is not indifference, is the deepest intimacy with one's own soul. And that intimacy becomes irresistible, for it whispers to him of a freedom he both desires and fears. In silence, she is not chasing him, not demanding him, not even needing him. She is choosing herself, and nothing draws him closer than the haunting realization that she no longer waits. A man is haunted not by what he has conquered, but by what eludes him. Words can be argued with, promises can be dismissed, and even affection can be taken for granted. But silence, true, unshaken silence, cannot be grasped, and that is why it lingers in the masculine mind like a shadow at dusk. When a woman falls into her silence with grace, she becomes more than a partner in his eyes. She becomes a myth, a living archetype, a figure that transcends the mundane logic of everyday attachment. He does not remember the countless conversations that blurred into routine, but he remembers vividly the day she did not respond, the moment her stillness pierced the air like a blade of light. Jung described the anima as the inner feminine that dwells within a man's psyche, often appearing in dreams, fantasies, and projections. When a woman embodies silence, she embodies this anima more fully than any words could. She ceases to be predictable and becomes symbolic, a mirror of the mystery within him. It is why silence feels addictive, because it does not feed his conscious control, but instead ignites the unconscious hunger to unite with what he cannot possess. Her silence becomes an initiation rite, an unspoken challenge. Will he descend into his own depths, or will he flee from the very thing he craves? This is where the paradox emerges. Many women believe that silence is distance, that it pushes him away, that it signals disconnection. But in reality, silence creates the very tension that binds him. The human psyche does not cling to abundance, it clings to scarcity. What is rare becomes sacred. The silence of a woman, rare in a world oversaturated with noise and explanation, becomes that sacred scarcity. To him, it feels like standing at the edge of a cliff, terrifying, exhilarating, impossible to ignore. He wants to step back, but the abyss calls to him, and sooner or later, he steps forward. There is also a psychological dimension rooted in trauma and attachment. Many men carry unresolved fears of abandonment, childhood echoes of being unseen or unheard. When a woman offers endless reassurance, she unknowingly soothes but also enables those wounds, keeping him comfortable yet stagnant. But when she withdraws her words, he is forced to face his own fractures. Silence pulls the mask from his bravado, forcing him to reckon with the hollowness beneath. In that reckoning, he is drawn to her not because she fixes him, but because she reminds him of the part of himself that still longs to be whole. Her silence is not cruelty, is alchemy as alchemy. Imagine the difference between a woman who says, "I need you to understand me," and a woman who says nothing, simply turning her gaze inward. The first entangles him in her need. The second confronts him with his own. And it is that confrontation which unsettles and compels him to return. He may not even realize it consciously, but he feels it. Her silence makes him restless. It pushes him into the night to replay every detail, to search the hidden meanings in her absence. He tries to fill the void she leaves, but every attempt echoes back with more questions than answers. That is the addiction and unanswered question that burrows into his psyche. The Stoics wrote that control is an illusion, that we suffer most when we grasp for what does not belong to us. A silent woman embodies this truth more profoundly than 1,000 lessons could. By refusing to feed his appetite for words, she refuses to be consumed. She reminds him that she is not his to own, not his to define. And in that refusal, she awakens something primal, the awareness that true connection cannot be forced. It must be chosen freely, again and again. Silence strips away illusion and demands authenticity. He returns not because she begged him to, but because her silence dared him to discover who he really is. For her, this silence is not without cost. It demands discipline, the courage to resist the impulse to defend, to explain, to win. It requires a woman to be anchored in her worth so deeply that she does not crumble when met with his absence. Yet this is precisely where her transformation unfolds. She learns that the most powerful form of communication is often no communication at all, for silence speaks in a language the soul cannot ignore. She becomes a sovereign figure. Her presence a cathedral of calm that no storm can collapse. And here lies the deeper truth. Silence is not just his addiction, it is her liberation. Every time she chooses quiet dignity over frantic noise, she frees herself from the cycle of dependency. She reclaims the right to be still, to be whole, to be untamed by external chaos. The paradox is that in choosing herself, she becomes the one thing he cannot let go of. For men may chase noise for distraction, but they crave silence for meaning. And in her silence, she becomes the meaning he cannot find elsewhere. A man may chase novelty, indulge in fleeting thrills, and drown himself in distractions, but the silence of a woman he once touched cannot be erased. It lingers in his chest like a phantom rhythm, a melody unfinished. He can recall her laughter. He can recall her words, but it is her quietness that clings like smoke to the walls of his memory. This is because silence, unlike words, does not age. It does not weaken with repetition. Instead, it deepens with time, like wine fermenting in the dark, growing more intoxicating the longer it remains untouched. Most women underestimate this power. They believe the battlefield is in persuasion, in explanation, in proving their worth aloud. Yet when a woman leans into silence, she steps off that battlefield altogether. She ceases to play by rules that were never hers to begin with. Silence is not retreated, is transcendence. It is the declaration that her essence needs no justification, that her presence speaks louder than any defense. And so she becomes the enigma he cannot decode, the mystery that refuses to collapse into clarity. Jung reminded us that what we suppress becomes fate. For a man, what he suppresses most is vulnerability. He hides it beneath bravado, beneath logic, beneath performance. But when confronted with feminine silence, all his masks crack. Suddenly, there is no noise to drown his hidden fears, no distraction to shield his shadow. Your silence forces him to sit with the questions he avoids. Why does her absence disturb me more than her presence ever did? What am I missing within myself that her quietness exposes? This confrontation is not comfortable, but it is unforgettable, and it is precisely this discomfort that makes him return. Think of the way silence shapes art. In music, it is the pause that gives the note its power. In poetry, It is the space between words that allows the meaning to breathe. A woman's silence works the same way. It is not empty. It is charged with meaning. It tells him that she will not be reduced to noise, that her essence is not up for negotiation. It tells him that love is not a performance to be endlessly explained, but a reality to be felt in stillness. And this strikes him deeper than any verbal plea ever could. Yet, silence does more than disturb, it transforms. It transforms her into a mirror where he sees both his desire and his inadequacy. The addiction is not just to her, but to the version of himself he glimpses in her quiet presence. He sees his need, his hunger, his longing to be chosen rather than begged. He is pulled back not because she clings, but because she doesn't. This inversion unsettles him. It flips the script he expected that she would chase while he retreated. Instead, she retreats, and he feels the primal panic of loss. But it is not just loss, it is a lure. For nothing is more magnetic than what is slipping away. Consider the Stoic wisdom that the strongest fortress is self-command. A woman in silence builds this fortress without bricks, without stone, without walls. Her silence is the gate he cannot pass unless she opens it. He may try to break it with anger, with charm, with promises, but none succeed. The gate remains closed, and the mystery grows. And the more he tries, the more he discovers that the true prison is not her silence, it is his addiction to it. He is captive not because she holds him, but because she refuses to. For her silence is not always easy. It is a discipline, a testing ground of patience and faith. It is the fire where her old patterns burn away, the compulsion to explain, the need to justify, the fear of being misunderstood. In silence, she proves to herself that her worth does not hinge on being heard by him, but on being whole within herself. This is the transformation. She becomes sovereign, no longer a character in his drama, but the author of her own. Her silence ceases to be about him and becomes about her communion with her inner self. This is why men return. Not because her silence was a trick, not because it was manipulation, but because it was truth. Her quiet became the most eloquent statement of all. I am not bound by your approval. I am not defined by your absence. I am not diminished by your failure to see me. She becomes not a memory, but a myth, not a chapter, but a haunting refrain. And the truth is, men do not chase what they fully understand. They chase what they cannot forget. And silence, when wielded with grace, is unforgettable. A woman who knows the value of silence carries a different aura. She is no longer chasing the performance of love, but embodying the essence of it. Her stillness becomes magnetic, not because it withholds affection, but because it radiates sovereignty. When she does not rush to fill the air with explanations, her very presence demands a deeper kind of listening. A man senses this immediately, though he may not know how to name it. He only knows that when she is silent, he cannot stop thinking of her. This is the paradox of attraction. Noise creates forgetfulness, but silence creates memory. Words can be twisted, doubted, dismissed, but silence leaves no exit, no escape route. It forces him to carry her presence into his own solitude. There, in the quiet of his mind, she grows larger than life. She becomes not just a woman, but an archetype, untouchable, the mysterious, the eternal anima that beckons him to depths he has never explored. Her silence is not a pause, it is a presence. It does not fade, it expands. Jung once noted that what we find irresistible in another is often the reflection of our own unclaimed depths. A woman's silence does precisely this, awakens in him the void he has buried. He may project frustration, he may accuse her of indifference, yet beneath his anger lies fascination. Why does her quiet haunt me more than her affection? Why do I long for her return when she gives me nothing to hold? These are questions that claw at his psyche. Her silence becomes the wound he cannot cauterize, the mirror he cannot break. From a stoic lens, her silence is virtue in action. It is restraint where there could be reaction, composure where there could be chaos. Seneca wrote that true strength is tested not in conquest but in self-command. In her silence, she demonstrates this self-command. She is no slave to impulse, no victim of emotional turbulence. She has chosen sovereignty over submission, and this unsettles him deeply. For in his world, power is often loud and forceful. Yet here she stands, powerful precisely because she does not speak. Her silence exposes the fragility of his own bravado. This is where the addiction takes root. Addiction is not born from satisfaction, it is born from lack. He is addicted not because she gave him everything, but because she gave him nothing he could control. Her silence denies him closure, denies him resolution, denies him the comfort of knowing. And in that denial, she becomes unforgettable. He finds himself circling back, again and again, not to her words, but to the space she left behind. That space becomes a gravitational pull, one that his mind cannot resist. Yet her silence is not about him, it is about her. It is the sanctuary she builds within herself, where her worth is no longer contingent on being understood. Each moment she chooses quiet over desperation. She strengthens her center. She learns that silence is not weakness, but a discipline, a meditation, a reclaiming of her own power. She ceases to perform, ceases to explain, ceases to convince. Instead, she becomes, and in becoming, she transcends. The man may be drawn back, but she is no longer waiting for his return. She is waiting only for herself. Imagine this: he comes back, expecting the old pattern, expecting her to greet him with questions, with longing, with explanations. Instead, she offers stillness, not coldness, not hostility, simply the unwavering presence of a woman who no longer needs. He feels it instantly. He realizes he is not returning to the woman he left, but to someone transformed. Her silence has not only unsettled him, it has reshaped her. She has emerged from it like steel from the fire, stronger, sharper, unyielding. And he, caught between fascination and fear, cannot let go. This is why silence is not merely is metamorphosis. For the woman, it burns away the illusions that once kept her chained. For the man, it awakens the shadows he cannot escape. It is both wound and cure, mirror and abyss. And in its quiet depth, it rewrites the dynamics of power. No longer is she the seeker, the one who waits. She has become the one who is sought, the one who is remembered, the one who is addictive, not because she gives endlessly, but because she withholds with grace. Silence, then, is not absence, it is ascension. What unsettles a man most is not the storm of a woman's words, but the calm after she ceases to speak. In that quiet, he realizes something that rattles his very core. Her world no longer revolves. Around him, silence, then, is not merely an absence of sound, it is a shifting of gravity. The orbit changes, and he feels himself pulled toward her, without understanding why. She has become a sun unto herself, radiating a quiet force that bends his trajectory back to her. That is why he returns. Not because she begged, not because she convinced him, but because her silence restructured the field in which he thought he had power. A woman's silence is his mirror. In it, he sees his impatience, his fear, his need for validation. He sees his hunger for control and his inability to sit with uncertainty. When she speaks, he can deflect, argue, rationalize. When she is silent, he has nowhere to hide. Her stillness becomes a canvas onto which his own shadows are projected. This is why it haunts him. It is not only her absence that disturbs him, but the way her absence magnifies his own. Jung would call this the confrontation with the shadow, the unwanted truth that arises when illusions collapse. He does not merely miss her, he misses the self he felt when she was present. And that longing can never be quenched by words. Think of how silence operates in nature. The forest at dawn does not rush to fill itself with sound. It waits, pregnant with possibility. The sea before a storm holds its breath, heavy with unspoken power. In the same way, a woman in her silence is not empty, she is charged. She is alive with potential, unpredictable, sovereign. He feels this like an electrical current, even if he cannot articulate it. Silence, then, is not passive, it is elemental. It is the storm before the lightning, the hush before the crescendo. To stand in her silence is to stand before something vast, something untamed. This dynamic is not about punishing him. It is not about withholding affection as a game or using silence as a weapon. The addiction lies not in cruelty, but in sovereignty. A woman rooted in her silence is a woman who has returned to herself. She does not withdraw in bitterness, but in strength. She has chosen to dwell in her own center rather than orbit his chaos. And this terrifies him. For men are accustomed to being the axis, the reference point. When she no longer circles him, he realizes he has lost his compass. And so he returns, not because she calls him, but because he cannot navigate the emptiness. Without her, the Stoics taught that power is measured by what cannot be disturbed. A silent woman embodies this principle. She is unshaken by his absence, unshaken by his return. She does not tremble when he leaves, nor flutter when he reappears. Her silence has given her mastery over herself, and that mastery is magnetic. For men are drawn to what they cannot disturb, even as it unnerves them. He comes back not because she is fragile, but because she is not. Her silence declares, "I am whole," and wholeness is irresistible. But silence also transforms her. Each time she resists the impulse to fill the void, she grows more certain that her worth is not transactional. She does not need to buy his love with her words, nor bargain for his attention with explanations. She learns that silence can be her language of dignity, her song of self-respect. In this language, she discovers freedom. Freedom from the cycle of chase and retreat. Freedom from the weight of being understood by someone unwilling to listen. Freedom to stand as herself, no more, no less. Silence becomes her crown, invisible yet undeniable, and so, when he returns, as he inevitably does, the story has changed. She is no longer the woman he left behind. She is not waiting, not pleading, not aching. She is simply present, wrapped in the sovereignty her silence has forged. He may come back, but she is no longer bound to receive him. He may seek her, but she has already found herself. The power of silence lies here. It is both his addiction and her liberation. He craves what he cannot control, and she claims what she will not surrender. That is why silence endures, it heals her, even as it haunts him. The silence of a woman who has found her center is unlike anything else a man encounters in his life. It is not the silence of distance, nor the silence of punishment, but the silence of presence, so complete that it no longer needs validation. He feels it the way one feels a cathedral, an invisible architecture of reverence, stillness that humbles. Without a single word. This silence is not against him, nor for him, it simply is. And because it exists independent of him, it unsettles him in ways he cannot reason through. For the first time, he realizes she belongs more to herself than to his story. This is why silence becomes addictive. A man can dismiss words, he can harden himself against pleas, but he cannot unhear silence. It follows him like a shadow, echoing in his thoughts when he tries to sleep, resurfacing in places he least expects. He may bury himself in distraction, but silence seeps through the cracks. It is the absence that feels like a presence, the unfinished sentence that keeps rewriting itself in his imagination. He does not crave her noise, he craves the way her silence forces him into confrontation with himself. He is pulled back not by her effort, but by her effortless refusal to chase. In psychological terms, silence activates projection. Jung would remind us that what we cannot see in ourselves, we see in others. When she withholds her words, he begins to fill the void with his own fears, his own desires, his own unfinished business. She becomes a canvas painted by his unconscious, and this makes her unforgettable. He cannot tell where she ends, and his own longing begins. This is the power of the archetypal feminine. She becomes less of a person in his mind and more of a myth, and myths do not fade easily. From a Stoic perspective, her silence is the practice of control through She does not react to his chaos, nor does she yield her composure to his absence. She embodies the truth Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Her silence is the living expression of this power. By refusing to be pulled into his storms, she declares that her peace is her own to guard. This is precisely what makes him return, because he cannot fracture her. In her stillness, she reflects the cracks in him. For her, the journey of silence is also one of shadow work. It forces her to wrestle with her own impulses, the need to explain, the urge to beg, the fear of being forgotten. Each time she chooses stillness, she reclaims a piece of herself that had been scattered in the noise. She discovers that the world does not collapse when she withholds words. Instead, her silence becomes fertile ground where her true self grows stronger. This is individuation in action, the slow, steady emergence of a self no longer defined by others' recognition, but by its own essence. He feels this shift instinctively. When he returns, he does not return to the woman he once knew. He returns to someone new, someone who has been tempered by silence like steel in fire. She no longer vibrates with anxiety, no longer clings to the outcome, no longer bleeds her worth into his hands. She has become whole in her own right. And in this wholeness, she is both the addiction he cannot quit and the sanctuary she no longer needs to offer him. She is not waiting, she is simply being, and that, more than anything, unsettles him. Here lies the final paradox. Silence both binds him and frees her. He is chained by the absence he cannot resolve, while she is liberated by the stillness that grounds her. For him, silence is torment. For her, it is peace. And though he may come back, his return is no longer her salvation, it is merely his compulsion. She has discovered something greater than his presence. She has discovered her own. And in that discovery, she no longer fears his leaving, because she knows she will remain. The woman who understands this walks through the world differently. She does not rush to explain herself, nor does she tremble at the threat of abandonment. She carries silence as a crown, radiant and invisible, commanding without demanding. Men may orbit her, pulled by the gravity of what they cannot name, but she does not orbit them. She is her own axis, her own center, her own myth, and in that sovereignty, she whispers the final truth. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.